Welcome today to the Mr. Madrid show. Today we have a special guest, someone who has been in the real estate business since 2003. And then in 2011, was able to open up his own brokerage. Talk about it being inspired, right? He manages 65 agents throughout Central Florida, Southwest, West Central Florida. And nowadays, he mainly serves as a coach and as a mentor, but keeps his edge by remaining in the sales game. It's none other than Tony Stanley. Tony, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Tony Stanley is from OptimaOne Realty, and you've been there for all since 2003, or have you moved around a little bit?
So I started real estate in 2003 down in the Fort Myers area, and then I moved up to Claremont in 2011, and that's the same year that I opened up my office. So we've been downtown Claremont since 2011.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. I love the Claremont area, especially like right on the waterfront. That whole area is beautiful.
Have you been down there lately? I mean, the whole scene has changed. I mean, they're really doing some improvements down there.
Yeah, I was down there when I think they extended the biking path. They did some
Hmm.
work on that. I just saw I saw the breweries that opened up, the pizza shops. It's
Yeah,
just it's happening down there.
it
I
really
know
is,
that.
man.
Yeah, I know that I had family that moved down to Claremont like in the early 2000s when there was really nothing out there, and now it's like it's established. It's one of the best places to live. I loved it out there when I was living out there. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but Tony, so a question that I ask all my guests, and it's just so the listeners, the viewers can get to know you a little bit better. And it goes like this: Who is Tony Stanley?
Yeah, so I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, actually, so I'm a Midwesterner, and was kind of going down the wrong path actually up there. So my wife, who was then my girlfriend, her father moved down to Florida and started selling real estate for Coldwell Banker. And at that time, I had just lost my job, so I was laid off, and then so I was hearing my father-in-law saying, he's making all this money in real estate in Florida. And so I took the plunge, moved down to Florida with one car and our dogs. That's basically all I had, and just got into real estate. So, who is Tony Stanley now? I mean, I'm a real estate broker. Been in real estate for 21 years. Like you said, I mentor our agents, and real estate is actually, I mean, it's a passion that I have. Most people get into real estate as like a fallback career,
Yeah.
but this is something I chose to do like for the rest of my life. And I chose that when I was 21 years old. So that's who I am, man. That's all I know is real estate. I don't know anything else.
That's awesome. You're the guy to know then for sure. The guy to have his number, call up and ask for any advice. That's an
Absolutely.
awesome story, man. It's super inspiring. I mean, just off the gate, the story that I mentioned that you shared with me, just being in business since 2003, opening up your brokerage clearly shows that you had a path of entrepreneurship. Just to get straight to the question, and I'm sure a lot of viewers are going to appreciate this. What do you think about real estate now in 2024? Like with everything that's happened, we had COVID, the change of presidents, and all this stuff. We definitely don't have to get into politics, but as far
Yep.
as like the state of real estate right now, like what do you think? What are your thoughts?
So, after I remember COVID, and everybody was afraid that the market was going to crash, and including me, I was a little worried, right, because everything was just dead, and then it had the opposite effect. So, if you were to bought your home in 2020, you have probably 30 to 50% equity right now. Um, it's crazy. So, and then because of that, they everybody was working remotely. And if you're working remotely, you get to choose where you live. So everybody was choosing to live where there's nice weather, there's beaches. So the Florida population boomed because of that. And that's why in 2022, we were seeing all these multiple offer situations. We used to have to, when we were showing houses, we had to wait in line to get in there because there were just so many buyers out. And the interest rates were so low, right? They were like 3%. And then so 2023, obviously the rates went up, doubled. They were up, past 7%. So that really slowed things down. The market didn't crash; it wasn't near crashing because the inventory levels are still low, but it definitely slowed down. As it used to be a seller's market to where buyers had like, if you wanted that house, you had to come in at full price or pay over, waive the appraisal, buy the seller's pizza for a year, anything you could possibly do to put in that offer to get it accepted. So that was not a great time to buy. Um, right now in 2024, we are in a balanced market, right? So you have a seller's market and a buyer's market.
Okay.
Right now, we're balanced. They say about anything 4 months or over of inventory is going to be a buyer's market to where buyers have more control and can negotiate more. So right now, we're at 3 months of inventory. So it is it's a better time to buy today than it was last year. I'll tell you that.
Okay.
Even with the rates the way that they are,
Yeah.
you know, last year or 2022, if you were to buy at a 3% interest rate, you were still paying possibly $40,000, $50,000 over the value of the home. Now you can go in and make offers, and actually get the home for less than what it's listed for. And not only that, but the sellers are more negotiable. You can
Okay.
get closing costs paid for you. And this whole thing about interest rates, where we can get into now or later, it's up to you. But we're hovering in the high sixes right now.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean, like, if you were to come and buy a house, that doesn't mean you have to pay that, because there's things that we can negotiate, right? So one thing is called a seller buy down or a rate buy down,
Okay.
and that's where the seller will buy down the rate. And that's something we as realtors negotiate for you. So the way that that kind of works briefly is, if you are buying a home and the rate is 6.5%, we can negotiate what's called a 2-1 buy down, where the first year on your mortgage payments, you're going to be paying a 4.5% interest rate. And then the second year would be a 5.5% interest rate. And then it would go back to the normal, whatever the rate is, right? So, but by that time, rates should be down anyway, so you can refinance and get a lower rate. That all being said, 2024, what we're looking at now, a more balanced market. There's Fannie Mae. They do what's called a home price survey, where they survey 100 experts throughout the housing industry.
Okay.
What they're predicting is 2024, an increase of 2.4% in home values, 2025, an increase of 2.7%, and then 2026, they're predicting an increase of 3.7% of home values. So it's definitely looking very positive.
Got it. Got it. I mean, it's so cool that you broke that down for us, because I'll say, like, we were entertaining the idea of potentially um, looking to get something a little bit bigger, and stuff like that, and just looking at the market and looking at the increase. Like, we definitely went into the whole idea of it not equipped with information. So it's so easy for somebody to get discouraged into making a move like that. Um, what would you say for people like that, for people that currently have a home, and they got in, because that's it's a whole thing on social media, where it's like people that thought they bought their starter home are now like, this is my forever home, just because of the
Yeah.
interest rate and all that stuff. What do you say to people like that are in a situation where they initially bought a starter home and then they were thinking about eventually upgrading? What does that look like? What would you suggest to somebody in those shoes?
So, what I always tell people, and this is, a lot of realtors are probably going to hate me for this, because, it's not always a good time to buy or sell. And if you have a 3% interest rate, and if you can stay in that house, stay in that house. That's a
Yeah.
great, you're never going to get that again, you
Yeah.
know. But if you do want to move, and on the flip side of that, if you do have a 3% interest rate on your current home, your payments are a lot lower. With the rental market the way that it is, you could keep that home and rent it out and make some residual income. And then what I would suggest to do is probably take out a home equity line of credit, which is called a HELOC, and use your current equity to put that money down on another house. And that way you have your primary, and then you have your current house as a rental property. So that would be the best way to do it, and it's a lot easier than people think. People think that they have to sell their house to buy another one because they need the cash.
Yeah.
But the best thing to do is to keep that house and use that equity to buy another home, if you can. If the equity's there.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Like, and I'll tell you, like, one of the main reasons that I think like I reached out to you is because I was in a situation, like as I mentioned before, where I feel like, you know, um, sellers are always going to try to sell. Like that's what I do for a living, right? And not that they'll guide you in a malicious way, but we're all trying to fluff up our pockets, feed our families, and things like that. But what you just said is so amazing because it's almost like the advice that you gave just now is putting somebody in the position for like their long term goals to be met. For you to
Yes.
think about, I forget what's the terminology, but just like I always tell my wife, like when we were even thinking about selling it, and I was just like, when we initially got here, like my plan was never to sell this house, right? To become like a landlord, and I like that whole the
Right.
whole the whole concept of that. And eventually, have another house. Our third house would have been our forever home, or will be our forever home, right? Because we have two
Yeah.
kids and stuff like that. But that's the exact thing that you just said is kind of falls in line with the plan that we've always had. And like for you to say it, you said it so beautifully, and it's like it's not like you're forced to do anything. It's like the ideal thing is if you have a 3% interest rate, you're in a good situation for the most part,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? And then on top of that, I bought in 21, so there's a little bit of equity there. Like that's so awesome that you said. I'm so thankful to even be talking to you right now because it lets me know that that's not a bad idea. And because there's people that will discourage you from doing the HELOC. Why would you think that would be the case? Like why would a realtor discourage somebody from not going that route?
Unfortunately, I mean, the truth of it is, I think, there are some realtors out there that they want the money. That's
Hmm.
it. Everybody's situation is different. And when it comes into like HELOCs and is it a good idea for you, I always refer those to my lenders, those questions to my lender. But the way that I've built my business, and I just kind of, when I got into real estate, this is a true story here. So I was working at Coldwell Banker, and a guy comes in and he says, "I want your newest, youngest agent." And that happened to be me. So this guy was an investor, and he would buy land, sell it to builders, and some other stuff. But he taught me about investment real estate. And
Yeah.
because of that, most of my transactions, maybe, well, I would say most, or at least more than half, have been with investors of some sort. So I always look at the investment side of real estate. So to me, you know, you should keep all the homes that you can possibly keep.
Yeah.
And I would never tell somebody to sell just to fill my pockets. And another thing that I think, if realtors are listening to this, they have to understand that, if you want real estate to be longevity, you can't, it's not just about one sell. That information that I gave you, Anthony, I mean, if you met with another realtor and they told you the opposite, maybe now you trust me more, and
100%.
you're going to do that HELOC and buy another house. And guess what? That next house, you might do it again and buy another house from me.
Yeah.
So that one sell just turned into three. So that's why you always have to have people's best interest in mind,
Yeah.
because it is a longevity game, and doing things right and helping people out goes a very long way versus just one sell. So I mean, I don't know why anybody would advise against that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, the most I could say on a personal level, that shows that you're very honorable, and I admire that big time.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
a question for you is like, so being that we're in the state that we're at, where folks are scared to get into these high interest rates, and it blows my mind, to be honest with you, because I have conversations with friends and coworkers all the time that are still renting, and they're like, oh, we're waiting for the interest rate to go down. Now, all I know is that I purchased a home when things were okay. I get that interest rates are high. I would argue against that all day. My argument is always like, why would you continue to rent and put money? You're basically throwing money in the garbage every single month. It's
For
something
sure.
that'll never be yours. Why do you think that folks like, and I guess this is obvious, right? They're scared about the interest rate, but do you think that's the right approach? Do you think that people should continue to wait for the for because the news tells you different things, social media tells you all these things, but to me it's like the rent is continuing to get higher and higher, right? When I first got to Florida 2018, it was like, we got a regular apartment. I came from New York City. It wasn't the most beautiful thing in the world, but it was way better than we were at in New York, right?
Right.
And we were paying like $1,200 for a two bed, two bath. You don't find that anymore nowadays.
No,
And especially if you want something nice here in Florida, obviously you're gonna want a place that has a gym, that has a nice pool, and also now we're talking for the same setup. And you correct me if I'm wrong, we're looking at over 2 grand.
for sure.
you
Yeah.
know so it beats me why anybody would want to continue to do that. What would you do? What would you say to those that are holding off on that and waiting for this interest rate to come down?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a good idea, right? To wait, but here's the thing too: is they're never going to come. Well, they may not come down to 3% again. They're projecting by the end of this year, they'll be in the low sixes. Right now, we're in the high sixes. So how much is that really affecting your payment? And when you're renting, you are paying somebody else's mortgage.
Yeah.
And it's 100% interest, right? Because you're not
Yeah.
getting anything back. The other thing that people have to be aware of and be careful is if you wait till the end of this year to buy real estate when the interest rates are down, guess who else is waiting? Everybody else. So
You get into
that
that market.
competition, yeah, that competition you're going to have, it's not good because now you have 10 people per one house versus one for a house, and now you're not going to be able to negotiate. You're not going to be able to get those rate buy downs. You're back to buying pizza for a year for the seller. Uh, so it's yeah, it, it sounds good because rates are, wait till they come down. But on all honesty, like the way that the market is, it's not a good idea to wait. You're
Yeah.
going to pay more. I promise you that,
Yeah, because
unless something crazy happens.
yeah, because if you figure, like, just doing some simple math, let's lowball it and say 2,000 a month that you're paying, right? That right there is what, 24,000 a year. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, my math
Yep.
is right. 24 grand that you just threw in the garbage that you're fine with. And in that year's time, you could have built some equity and all these things. That's why I argue against it all the time. And then with the fact that excuse me, you can negotiate a lower interest rate and kind of have it like a stair, and wait that if
Mhm.
it does come down some and it's a comfortable rate for you, you can go ahead and refinance. Not to
Yeah.
get too deep into that portion of refinancing, but how difficult is that process of refinancing?
It's easy. It's easy, and you just call a lender, and they'll have an appraiser come out, appraise your home, and don't quote me on this, but I believe typically they'll loan up to 80%. If you want to do a cash out refi or anything like a HELOC, but the refi itself is very simple. There are closing costs associated with that, but those can also be rolled into the loan. You know,
Nice. Which,
and
if you're getting into a better interest rate, that it might
it
make
might
sense.
work for you. Absolutely, yeah. But
Gotcha.
I always tell people too, like, although real estate is the best investment you're going to make, right? Because if you keep your money in a savings account, I think the average person earns less than 1% in interest.
Yeah.
Um, But if you put your money into real estate, you're making equity. Like there's never a bad time to buy because real estate is always going up. I mean, it may roller coaster a little bit, but it's
Yeah,
always going up.
correct.
People are buying houses for their kids right now that are 5 and 6 years old. And
Yeah,
what they're doing, they're buying the house now because they're hedging inflation. And they're buying the house now because they know that in 10 years or 20 years, when the kid's able to move in there, it's going to be unaffordable.
yeah,
So there's really not a lot of good reasons not to purchase.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. So based on that, I wouldn't. I guess we kind of agree that it's not saying that it's a bad time to buy. It's an okay time to buy, right? Would you say that? Would you agree with that? It's an okay. It's not a bad idea
100%.
whatsoever.
It is not a bad time to buy right now. You're going to be able to negotiate. We're seeing so list price versus sales price ratio, right? A few years ago when the rates were low, it was 101, 102%, meaning on average, the buyers were paying higher than list price. Right now, that list price versus sales price ratio is averaging about 98%. So that's telling us sellers are more negotiable. Not only is the buyer getting the home for less than what it's listed for, but they're also getting closing costs paid for. They're getting their interest rates bought down. So this is a good time to buy. It really is, if your finances are there.
Got it. That's awesome, man. And then I'm sure it's gonna go down some more. I think people like for me, I understand what you're saying a little bit more when it comes to like if you wait, everybody else is waiting, and it's gonna get to a point that when you think you're ready, it's gonna be mad. It's gonna be these bidding wars that
Yeah,
during COVID wasn't fun. For a person like me that wanted to stay in Claremont, which I loved Claremont so much, or even Groveland, it
yeah,
wasn't possible because you had folks from up north coming down with cash
yeah.
offering up 20, 30, $40,000 more than the listed price, as you said, waiving all appraisals and like even inspections, I think at some points,
They
in
were.
buying the home. So I was fortunate enough to have a new build that was move-in ready, one of those situations. But I had to go to the other side of Florida, a place that I wasn't very familiar with. First time home buyer, so I was like, yeah, let's do it. Um, what would you say on the flip side of that? So we agree that now is a good time to buy. It's not a bad idea. Do you think it's a good time to sell at this point?
So because the sellers don't have a whole lot. I mean, there's still negotiation, but not like it was 2 years ago. The best time to sell was a few years ago, right? Because
Yeah,
you could demand everything. We were having people staying in their house 30 days after closing. So is it a good time to sell? I mean, that's a question. I think that's very individualized. Um, I probably, and again, realtors are going to hate me for this, but I probably wouldn't sell right now if I didn't have to.
yeah.
I would definitely, wait probably towards the end of the year, when more buyers are out and that competition starts getting back in. That's probably the best time if you could wait. And
Tony, you're the guy to talk to, man. Like your honesty is just everything, and that's why you've done well for yourself. That's why you have your own brokerage because you're honest. I mean, it comes
I,
out through
I,
your pores, man.
I cannot be anything but honest, man. I mean, it's just people rely on us for one of their biggest assets. You have to, guide them correctly,
Yeah, yeah.
and
You
that's
play
what
the
we do.
long game, not the short game. The short
Absolutely,
game is
yeah,
when you got other intentions, when you're dealing with these clients, and that's awesome, man. It's pretty cool to know that. Um, what I would say too is like when and to going back to the same thing, like when I was thinking about selling, it's almost like what you say. It's a by case basis. In my case, it wasn't super necessary. Like it was almost, and I'll tell you, like I was dealing with a realtor that was kind of rushing the process a little bit.
yeah,
Whereas like we could list it and we could potentially do a contingency with a new build, and it was just it was so much anxiety involved in that we just said, you know what, we're not doing it. And
yeah,
everything happens for a reason because it brought us back to our plan. which is what you recommended, is if you can hold it, hold on to it and rent it out, and then do the
Absolutely.
HELOC and go that route, which is pretty awesome. On a side note, um, dealing with you know uh, communities and stuff like that within Central Florida, we know Disney is a hub, where people want to stay around it just because of the convenience of the parks and all this stuff. What do you think about that? Like, how do you think that specifically companies like Airbnb have played a role into real estate? Like, do you think that that's affected the real estate market? And do you think it's been a negative thing or a positive thing?
Yeah, so Airbnb does affect the real estate market, and with Airbnbs, their value, a lot of their value is based on how much income they're bringing in, because there's a thing called a cap rate. So the higher your cap rate on an investment property, the more your property's worth. So the cap rate is based on the rental income, and if people are renting these Airbnbs and making a lot of money, that's going to increase that value of that home or that condo, and then in turn it's going to increase everything around it, right? So Airbnb does play a big part of real estate here in Central Florida. And on the opposite side of that, when travel's down and when Airbnbs are down, lowers the values. All right. So it does have a trickle effect. So it could. Disney's obviously the main reason many people are in Central Florida.
Yeah.
Um, so the Airbnbs here are, from what I understand, typically pretty hot. I don't, I don't really do much of that side of real estate, but I do have an agent who has Airbnbs. I have one agent that has 14. I have another agent that has 3 rental properties and just bought one near the Disney area for an Airbnb. So it's from what I understand, definitely still a good market to be in.
Do you think being in an area, because I know that when I first came with my family specifically to go to Disney, we did our Airbnb in Four Corners. And
Yeah,
I remember, like, I stayed there and I was just like, wow. I mean, coming from New York City, Manhattan, where
yeah,
everybody's bunched up on top of each other in buildings and stuff, to have a house with a pool in the backyard, I was like, this is
right,
the dream, right? So
yeah,
I was like, I want to move somewhere like this. And then, as I started talking to people, they're like, you want to avoid areas that are populated by tourists. This is not the area for you. Like, do you think that also affects the resale value? Like, if
yes.
you happen to not know or be educated on that aspect, and you end up buying or at least close by, does that affect?
Definitely. So I always, when we have our buyer consultations, I'll ask a buyer, what is your purpose for this house now? What is your purpose for this house 2 years from now, 5 years from now? Because, in Claremont, you have 2 different zip codes, 34711 and 34714. Most of 34711, you can't have short-term rentals, right? It's a 6-month rental. But in 34714, it's zoned for short-term rentals. So whether it's short-term or long-term rentals, you never really want to buy in a community. If it's your primary residence, you don't want to buy in a community with a lot of rentals,
Yeah,
because typically renters don't take, not all, but renters don't take the care of a home like a homeowner would,
correct.
um, and that will devalue the neighborhood, especially when you have Airbnbs. You have all kinds of families coming in and out. It's not as stable of a investment for real estate as a primary real estate. But if you're an investor, you want to buy in those short term areas for
Yeah.
Airbnb. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I remember that somebody mentioned that to me. They're like, you have to be careful. Like, even there's been areas that I think have done something similar that you just mentioned at Claremont, where it's like it's kind of broken up into different parts. So, like, the area that we were looking at one point was Davenport, and
Hmm.
one of the realtors were like, you have to be very careful where in Davenport you're at, because you don't want to be. It's almost like you're categorized in an area where it's like, even though it's residential, across the street, it's just madness with the
Yeah,
Airbnbs and all this stuff, which is super interesting. And you got to be careful. That's why it pays to have a knowledgeable, realtor who's going to guide you in the right area. Um,
for sure.
Another question I was going to ask you was, being that we're talking about, renters taking care of their home and things like that. I recently just heard about, and correct me if I'm wrong. I know that there's always been HOA, and I think there's this other thing
Yes.
now, it's
Yeah.
CDD. And I looked it up. It's something that's always been around, but it wasn't as commonly used, and now it's become, I guess, popular again within communities. Do
Mhm.
you think that that's something that will discourage buyers to move to certain areas, or
It definitely has discouraged some buyers. Communities with high CDDs, buyers don't want to do it. If unless there's something that really stands out in that community. But now you have like, you know, th- that fee is basically, they say it's used for like infrastructure and stuff like this, for the
yeah,
builder, and that will eventually fall off.
yeah,
But um, yeah, I've had buyers just tell me, I don't want a CDD. I don't
yeah,
care. Don't show me homes with a CDD.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I
but
didn't.
some of them, they can range from $80 to $1,200.
Sure. Yeah. What is your outlook on um just the market for 2024, in the sense of, like, and this has been a talk for years now, since COVID happened, like the economy's going to crash, the economy's going can you answer to the best of your ability? And I know that we have to stay within certain lines, and but what do you think? Do you think that we're going to experience any type of a crash? Does it seem like that?
No, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. But if I did, I think it would tell me no. I mean, that little 8 ball that you used to shake, and
Yeah,
it'll say, yeah. If I had that 8 ball, it would say all signs point to no.
gotcha.
Because what people don't understand is that the crash that happened before, which I was in real estate when it was, 2004, 05, 06, was large part due to the lending institution. Buyers were getting approved for loans that they can't afford. And there was a thing called, and there still is, an adjustable rate mortgage, which is called an ARM. And so you would have people get in these houses with like $2,000 a month payments. And then on year two, those payments would jump up maybe to $3,000. And so many people, like, I don't, maybe they weren't explained to or whatever, but so many people couldn't afford those payments raising. And that's so many foreclosures happened. I was
Yeah,
in Fort Myers at the time, and it was like one in every six houses were in foreclosure. It was crazy.
yeah.
Um, but they call it predatory lending, and they there was a joke back in the day that if you walk into a mortgage office and you have a mirror and you breathe on it and it fogs, you get a loan. um, there was another thing that, and this is a true story too, that somebody applied their dog to get a loan, and the dog got approved.
Oh,
Swear to
wow.
God.
So they weren't even looking at anything. It was just like approved,
No,
approved, approved.
because yeah, they were buying all these mortgages, selling them to bigger, so um, no, for the real estate market to crash, there has to be an excess of inventory, right? It's a supply and demand, just like any other commerce. So
Got it.
um, the supply was getting so high because everybody was losing their homes, and these
Yeah.
builders were building houses and had nobody to put into them, and so there were homes I was selling in a town called Lehigh Acres, that they started out at 250,000 when they were first built. 2 years later, during the crash, they were $60,000. You could buy a nice home,
My God.
but yeah, but because the inventory was so high. And here's another thing: is the banks, they didn't ever have this before, to where they had all these foreclosures. They're not in the real estate selling business. They're in,
Yeah.
loaning money. So all of these foreclosures, they just released them to the market. And then about a year or so after, they got smart and they said, wait a second, we are flooding the inventory. We are flooding the market.
Yeah.
That's And so they would pull them back and they would release some, like, And then there was this thing called neighborhood stabilization program where they wouldn't let investors buy for the first 2 weeks or so, or first look initiative. So if we had a situation like that again, well, one, the lending institution is a lot better now, right? They're not going to be giving all these crazy loans and stuff if you can't afford it. Two, banks are smarter, right? Because now they've been through it. They understand that if they have 1,000 foreclosures, they cannot release all of them at one time. So
Yeah.
they'll drop them, you know? So I don't see prices going down because of that alone. And people have to understand the reason why that happened. And banks don't want to lose money. So
Yeah.
why
Sure.
would they do that again? Why would they flood it again? They're not going to. Um, and here's the thing too, I think people don't understand is that we are in a like if real estate had a crisis, right? We are in an inventory crisis right now. The inventory is still super low for the amount of people that need to buy homes.
Yeah.
um, and until you see that absorption rate I was talking about earlier, where we have 3 months of inventory right now is a balanced market.
Yeah.
If we get to like 7, 8, 9, 10 months of inventory, then I'll
That's
say
time for
wait
issues.
to buy. Yeah, but I just don't see that happening. I mean, we're getting so many calls from people out of state still wanting to move to Florida. A lot of
Got
people
it.
from California are calling. They don't like whatever's going on over there, and so they want to be somewhere warm. They come to Florida. I think if anything, we're going to experience the opposite. I think the prices are going to just be so far out of reach for people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I do not see a crash coming anytime soon, and
Got it.
don't see it happening.
Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. And then just to piggyback on that, also just because I've seen stuff and heard stuff about like the effect on the forbearance that people were doing and not being
Yeah,
able to pay that back. Do you think that that can hinder it a little bit, or do you think that that creates opportunities for investors?
that's a very good question. And one thing you have to realize too is equity, right? So back in the crash, nobody had equity. There was a lot of short sales. They had to sell their properties, and we had to negotiate to lower the balance of the loan. But people that had bought in 2020, 2021, there's a lot of equity there. So
Yeah.
they shouldn't foreclose. They shouldn't lose their house. They should just sell it,
Yeah.
and they'll walk away with a lot of money. So I think because that there's equity there, I don't think that whole forbearance thing is going to be an issue. If anything, another talk was insurance raising, right? Because
Yeah.
insurance prices are a lot higher. But now we just had, like, I believe, 6 new insurance companies coming into Florida. So it's looking more positive on that end too.
Yeah. I think people need to be a little bit more, on the ball when it comes to things like this. Like we can't just rely on the mortgage company to do the work for us. So like we got to get a little bit
Right.
more savvy and more educated. And I'm included in that because I wasn't, I didn't know much about. I bought a house, didn't know much about escrow and things like that. Here, it's common when you have a new build. The first year, the taxes aren't where they're supposed to be, just because it takes about a year for everything to settle down. So my escrow was short, and I went through a couple different things, which forced me to look into everything.
Yeah.
And when I saw that the insurance rates were going up, I wasn't aware that I can go and search for my own insurance. So it's things like that that and the reason why I enjoy having a podcast, because having guests like yourself that can share some knowledge. There's a lot of folks out there that they don't know what that is, what
Right.
an escrow is. They don't know that you can go ahead and shop for rates for an insurance, because insurance rates, I think mine was gonna touch almost 2,000, and I was able to reach out and look around, and I was able to get something for like 980,
Good.
which is not too
Yeah.
bad. Like you have to do your due diligence. You have to really sit down and look through stuff. And even with the car insurances, like it's gone skyrocketed. My wife tells me every day, like, why are we paying so much? So
I
I'm
know.
tasked with that homework of going out on the hunt for stuff.
Yeah, I laugh because my wife just yesterday was talking about how high the car insurance was. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's gotten pretty bad. But the other thing that I didn't mention too, and and if you could share some about it, just because I have people all the time from back home from New York that they don't know that buying a house is something that's so highly possible.
Yeah,
And Tony, I'm in that story there where I thought it was always a dream to own a house. I just didn't know that I could do it. Can
yeah.
you tell us how easy the process is? I mean, you have to have all your ducks in a row, but is it as difficult as people think it is to buy their first home?
It really isn't, man, and you're not alone in that. I mean, some of my family members and me too. Before I got into real estate, it feels like this is going to be so difficult. It's really not. So the process is pretty simple. The first thing people would want to do is reach out to a lender, a mortgage broker.
Okay.
I always recommend to do, call a local mortgage broker.
Okay.
Um, and I'm going to give some tips here that are very valuable. So
Please.
some lenders, mortgage brokers, they're going to charge an origination fee. Okay, an origination fee could be like 1 to 3% of the purchase price. That origination fee is going to go. You're going to pay those at closing.
Okay.
So when you do call a mortgage broker, ask them what their origination fee is, because there are many actually out there that don't charge that. Okay. So no origination fee. Make sure you ask the lender that. And then they'll have you fill out an application. So the application is free. You just fill it out online, and then they're going to run your credit. Okay. And then they're either going to say, based on what I see, yes, you are pre-qualified for a loan amount of 300,000 or whatever it is, or based on what I see at this time, you can't qualify, but these are the steps you need to take. This is what you have to do. You should pay off your credit card, or you should do this. And then at that time, we can get you qualified. So it's there's nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about, and I think a lot of people feel that way. And just so you guys know, the realtors don't know any of your financial information. We don't see that. So we just know how much you're approved for. That's it.
Yeah.
Um, Once you get that approval letter, we go out and shop for a home. We go look at houses. You put an escrow deposit down, could be $1,000. Okay. And then you go through a home inspection and then closing. Now, I made that sound very simple, but everything else in between, the realtor deals with. But it's actually very smooth. It should be very smooth on the buyer's end.
Got it.
Yeah, I think people just don't understand how easy it is, and it doesn't cost anything to find out if you can buy a house.
Yeah.
And
And
what they really look for is debt to income ratio. So you want to obviously pay down debt as much as you can, but even if you have debt, if your income is high enough, it doesn't matter.
yeah.
Um, so two things I would tell people to do prior to calling a lender, and this is going to raise your credit score instantly, right? No matter what your credit score is. So ExperianBoost.com. You go on that site. You do have to enter your bank account information. It's a secured site, but ExperianBoost.com. Go there. If you pay your cell phone bill or your electric bill out of your bank account, they will take that into consideration, and it can boost your credit. So I've had customers that boosted their credit 60 to 80 points
Oof.
that day
That makes a
because,
difference.
yes. So your interest rate will typically be lower too, if you have the higher credit score. So that will boost your credit right away. The other thing that you can do, which I've done personally with my nieces and nephews, my niece bought a house at 18 years old because I put her on one of my credit cards.
Okay.
So if you have a family member or a very close friend, they can add you to their credit card account. Not as like you don't have to give a card. So it's just like an additional user,
Yeah.
but no card. That credit history. So if you have a family member that does that, you want to tell them to put them on the account that has the longest credit history and the best payment history. That will automatically transfer on your credit and raise your score. So, you know, those two things alone, you can be up 100, 150 points.
That's a
And
little
if you
cheat
can,
code right there.
yeah, man, yeah, and I'm telling you, it works. And I learned that from a lender,
That's
so
awesome. That you just dropped a gem for the viewers and the listeners.
absolutely,
That
we
that's
we
amazing.
turned many renters into home buyers just from those two things. Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, and again, to go back to like the encouraging people that if you are interested in becoming a home buyer, like I say it from experience, being somebody that was scared to get involved in any part of the process. Like my wife has a picture when we came to this community. Um, Long story short, my wife left the house with a pen ready, like her favorite pen. I said, "Babe, we're not buying a pair of shoes here. Like this is grown up stuff. Like this is a house." And that
yeah,
same day we came out, we signed with that pen. But I was on the floor, Tony. I was so nervous. I'm like, something's gonna go wrong. Everything went good. But just to tell the listeners, like, if you're thinking about doing it, most likely you're underestimating how soon you could get it done.
for sure.
And even if, like you said, Tony, even if you can't get it done, that's a resource when you go and get the credit ran because they're gonna tell you exactly what you need to do. If you
Yeah,
owe 5,000 on something, they'll say, "Hey, you don't have to pay the whole thing. Get it down to 3 and we can
yeah,
make it happen." As simple as that.
absolutely.
And then one thing, Tony, too, that people forget, don't do anything with your credit when you're in that process.
Yes.
I'm sure you have some horror stories, Tony. Like,
Oh, we do.
and can you explain to the folks what I mean by that? Like,
Yeah. So when you run a credit, when you get your credit ran and you contract on a home, that lender has to repull your credit a couple days prior to closing to make sure nothing has changed. So because your debt to income ratio has to be in a certain percentage, they have to make sure that you didn't go out and buy a car or buy a boat. We've had people do both. And you don't even want to open a Kohl's account, you know. So when you contract on a home, like no more credit for 30 days. It's going to take you about 30 days to close. Um, so yeah, you don't want to mess with any ratios there. And yeah, it could be a horror story.
yeah,
So
it
that's a
could.
great point to bring up.
So it's super crucial for you to follow the instructions that you're given by the mortgage, like the loan officer and your realtor.
Yeah.
Tony, just to wrap up here, I did want to ask you one last question. You had mentioned that you mentor your agents and you're also like a coach. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What does that look like? What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah. So, I own and run my brokerage. My wife and I are the broker and owners, and she takes care of the back end, and I train the agents on how to sell real estate and how to get leads. When I first moved up to Claremont in 2011, I didn't know anybody. 2011, nobody knew my company,
Okay.
so, um, a lot of realtors do well because their parents were in the business or they grew up in town, something like that. I did not. So I had to find ways to meet people, get them to know me, like me, and trust me. Right. And so that's what I teach every day at our company.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll mentor them on how to do that. We have something we call the 45-day challenge. So when the new agents come, we put them through this boot camp of real estate, basically. So me and we have another trainer on board. Her name's Patty O'Malley. She's very good. In fact, she actually has a real estate school called
Okay.
360 Florida Real Estate School, where she teaches the salesperson class. If you want to get your license, she also teaches the brokerage class. We have a lot of good agents on our team that are also mentors to our other agents. But our brokerage is so different because a lot of these brokerages that you go to, and I've been to some, it's very competitive in tier inside of the office. So we don't like that mentality. The one in Optima One stands for our team environment. So if you come into Optima One and work with us, you have 60 other agents that are there to help you, not compete against you. Um, on the flip side of that, for sellers and buyers, you have all of us. Like you list your home with us, you have 65 agents pushing it.
Wow.
versus if you list a home with a larger company, they're all for themselves, for the most part, unless they're on a team. But our brokerage acts like a team. We operate as a team. So whether you're looking to buy or sell or join real estate, become a realtor, it's just a great place. And obviously I'm biased when I say that, but out of the 65 agents we have, we don't recruit. Okay, so agents aren't going to get calls from us once they pass their class and say, "Hey, why don't you come over here and we'll take you out to lunch, we'll buy you coffee, this and that." We
Yeah.
don't do that. We don't recruit. Every agent that has come to us has come through word of mouth referral. Okay, so we're not looking to be this, monster 500 agent company that you're going to be just a number.
Yeah.
We sat down, you sat down with me as the broker, Patty as our trainer, and our other agents, and we will mentor you to make sure you understand real estate, that you're treating the public like they should be treated. It will teach you how to market. One of our other owners that bought into the company last year, he graduated from Yale from marketing. He's been a huge asset to us in our listings and all that stuff. So it's definitely, I mean, it's a all full time job for me. From the minute I wake up to the minute I go to sleep, I'm getting calls and texts from our agents. But that's what I chose to do.
Yeah.
It does not bother me. So that's my life, man. That's what happens.
That's awesome, Tony. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for giving us tips and giving us a little insight into the real estate world. It definitely shows that you live in that world and you enjoy it. And it's always
Absolutely.
flattering and inspiring to see somebody basically living out their dream, doing what they love. I
Yeah.
think that for the most part, a large majority of society, we're all pushing for that. And to see
Yeah.
somebody in that world in your own realm where you're happy and content, living it up, I tip my hat to you. I'm super inspired. I'm leaving this super inspired and even walking away with tons of gems that you've given us. And I want to thank you for that. How can people find you on social media? Where is the best place to reach out to you, or if they're interested in a property or finding somebody to help them with either the buying or selling portion, where can we reach out to you?
Yep. So, I mean, that you guys can reach me on my cell phone, 407-883-9694, or our website is movenextmonth.com. Social media, move next month. Okay. And, we're everywhere. We're on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all that good stuff. But, if anybody has questions, even if you're not ready to buy or sell right now, please reach out to me, text me. You can email me, TonyOptimaOne@gmail.com. Like, I want you guys to be educated before you go and make a very large purchase. That is very important to me. And I think our industry, unfortunately, doesn't do a great job, educating the public. So even if you're not using me as an agent, reach out to me. Now, I'm going to, a little cliff note here. If you do have an agent, I shouldn't talk to you. We shouldn't be talking, right? We got to
Yeah,
respect. But prior to, you don't have to use me. Just reach out and ask questions. And I want to give one more tip before we go here, because
please.
I think this is important. Is we're talking about interest rates, insurance hikes, stuff like that. One of the best things people can do right now, if you are in the market to buy, is to buy new construction. Builders right now are paying for your closing cost. They're buying down rates, a permanent buy down. Okay, so the life of the loan might be a 4.5 or 5% loan. Your insurance is going to be a lot lower because everything is new. And so that's the best. That's a very good way to start. You know,
Got it.
and the best thing to do when you're buying new construction is to buy in the first phase, because the first phase is always going to be better pricing than the other phases. So you're going to have instant equity. Most of our clients have instant equity when they close on their home with new construction. And I think a lot of people don't understand this too. But when you do buy new construction, get a realtor
I
that's
was
not,
just gonna ask you that. I was just gonna ask you.
yeah, yeah. You don't have to use the builder's rep. You shouldn't use the builder's rep. If you're going to court, you wouldn't use the opposite side's attorney. The builder's rep works for the builder. Okay, we are there to represent you. And believe me, guys, we have caught lots and lots of things, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of repairs that needed, closing costs that weren't accounted for. Uh, get somebody who's on your side. We can represent you with new construction anywhere in the state of Florida. It's not going to cost you anything, more for using a realtor like that. You're going to be
Awesome.
paying the same price, I guess you should say. I should say
Yeah,
something like
and
that.
I
Yeah,
think going into a situation like that where you're representing yourself is like it's a recipe for disaster because it's like you're not in that world. And as you mentioned, and the realtor that I used when I bought this place here, she told me she's like it doesn't make a difference on what you're paying for the home. You
right.
know, it's not going to affect you, and it's to your advantage. It's just to make sure you're protected. So 100%. You know,
Yeah,
100%. That's awesome that you mentioned that.
yeah. And I'm going to drop this real quick. New homes for humans. Okay, .com. People can go on there. We'll send you a list of new construction homes in the area.
Awesome, awesome. And definitely, folks, take Tony up on his offer. Ideally, I would love for you guys to use him because, if you watch this entire episode, you can see that the man is honorable. He's honest. He's not pushing you to do anything that shouldn't be done. If anything, he's encouraging you I would say, from the bottom of his heart on what options you should go with or what he recommends. So just that alone, like typically when you deal with salespeople, I'm a salesperson too. People always have like a negative persona of us as salespeople, and it's like just to meet somebody who's like, hey, this is your option. These are your options. You don't have to go this route, or you can go this route. So to be honest and honorable is super awesome. And I hope that people do reach out to you for questions and potentially even go with you for their first home or to sell their home, whatever it may be. And I do thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time out of your schedule to meet with me today and allow me to ask you a couple questions.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this. I love it, and I love what you're doing here. So, and I wish you the best as well. And we'll share the heck out of all your episodes.
Thank you very much, Tony. I hope you have a great day and enjoy your weekend, sir.
All right, Anthony. You too. Thank you.